The clause doesn't knock, it detonates. Buried in Stephanie's old capital structure is a line everyone thought was ceremonial, a founder's trigger that no one expected to ever see in daylight. It activates when a vendor dispute flips a timer inside the trust, and suddenly the future of Forrester isn't a runway, it's a sentence. To keep the founder's veto, the two family branches must unify the emblem. Counsel translates the antique phrasing and lands on the cruel simplicity. There is only one recognized method of unification under the trust's rules, a recommitment marriage between Brooke Logan and Ridge Forrester, recorded by the court, not a photo op, not a vanity vow renewal. If they refuse, the veto dissolves into a blunt supermajority, and the door swings wide for outside capital to pull the brand apart in the name of efficiency. Eric absorbs it without a shout. The room does the shouting for him. Shareholders ring phones raw. The trades run it as a blind item before lunch, and by evening Spencer Publications has a countdown clock with a syrupy lower third, bridge or bust. Taylor hears all of it, cuts through the noise, and plants herself dead center in the only lane that matters. No marriage will be turned into a corporate wrench on her watch. She calls the clause what it is, a lever that treats hearts as hardware, and she refuses to nod while strangers decide that years of painful work get reduced to a notarized fix. Ridge deflects with jokes that don't land. Brooke doesn't flinch. She knows what the town does to them when rings enter the conversation. Carter draws the shortest straw and the tallest responsibility in the same breath. He's counsel assigned to decode Stephanie's trapdoor, and he's the neutral officer the trust requires to witness any cure they choose. He has a past full of lines he hates crossing, a loyalty to the house that feeds him, and a city that still whispers about Quinn when his name hits the air. He buries himself in annexes and footnotes, reads old minutes, calls the trust officer who has Stephanie's neat signature burned into memory, and discovers that the timer behind the clause isn't generous. The sunset on founders' rights has started, 7 business days to cure, or the veto becomes a museum piece. The boardroom becomes a war room. Steffi's fury is strategic. She will not see her father and Brooke used as living lockpicks. Thomas sits straighter than he has in years and backs his sister. Hope tries to be the bridge who isn't a bride, arguing for a solution that preserves both dignity and control. Eric listens to all of them and says almost nothing, which in this family is more terrifying than a scream. Shareholders call with concerns, by which they mean threats, rivals leak sympathy, by which they mean offers, and the press parks vans by the hedges. Carter keeps looking for a door in a wall Stephanie built to be permanent. He finds it where she always hid things behind language. The trust recognizes equivalency instruments if 3 conditions are met. The instrument must unify the emblem as to stewardship. It must carry penalties equal to the consequences of a legal marriage, and it must be signed by parties with overlapping, legitimate claims to the emblem. No one has tried it because no one ever had to, but the law is a maze, and Steph was the kind of matriarch who left at least one exit for the family clever enough to find it. Carter brings it into daylight. Instead of a remarriage, they can register a corporate covenant. A contract with teeth, lodged with the court, that takes the founder's veto out of one pair of hands and locks it behind 3 signatures. The veto won't vanish. It will require all 3 keys to turn. Ridge and Brooke hold 2 by definition under the trust's logic. The third is the fight. Eric, who smells traps better than anyone still breathing on the estate, asks Carter the question that matters more than rumor. Will the trust and a judge accept a covenant like this as unification without rings? Carter refuses to guess. He dials the officer on the trust, eats the hold music, answers 2 rounds of ethics questions, and returns with a yes wrapped in razor wire. The instrument will count if the signers bind themselves to fiduciary duties and accept real forfeiture penalties for breach. No PR fluff. No promises without pain. Taylor's reaction is surgical. If a covenant prevents a theatrical wedding from being used as a screwdriver, then she wants it drafted in language so clean even the tabloids can't spin it. Brooke wants the bleeding to stop, wants the business protected without turning her life into a spectacle again. Ridge wants to save the house and hates that his wants always sound like that. Carter writes, he builds an agreement that moves like a statute and strikes like a prenup. The founder's veto converts to a 3-key lock. All 3 signatures are required to fire it, no 2 against 1, no emergency proxies. Penalties have weight. First breach strips 10% of voting shares, second strips 25%, third strips all. Oversight sits with an independent examiner approved by the audit committee, not the signers, and every attempt by a third party to purchase a key's influence has to be reported, or the key goes dark for 6 months on automatic suspension. The covenant is registered as an equivalency instrument, with the same court that would register a marriage, because symbolism is currency in this town and paperwork is armor. Brooke and Ridge sign on the spot. Taylor helps write the rules, then resists the final step. The third key cannot be a popularity contest. It must sit with a steward who won't turn every disagreement into a revival of old triangles. The candidates line up on paper and in whispers. Eric is the sentimental choice, but the clause wants overlapping claims to the emblem, not patriarchal gravity. Steffi argues the business case for herself, chief in a crisis, direct Forrester descendant, exacting spine. Hope counters with the quiet strength of someone who built a line and navigates both families daily without setting fires. Donna has trust, but not the required claim. Carter is begged by numbers people who don't know him well enough to realize he hates being a symbol. Brooke and Ridge leave one line blank on the filed covenant, third signatory, guardian of the emblem to be named. Carter schedules a board vote for that single slot in 72 hours, with a vetting process written down in ink so no one can call foul. The press feasts. Bill slaps Hanyu Seetsong Tai across a front page and calls it a power play dressed like a love story. The town argues itself hoarse about who should hold the third key. Ridge and Brooke share a look no one can read and get out of each other's way. Taylor stands still while the ground shifts. Then the floor buckles. A woman in a gray coat steps into the atrium like she owns the marble, and for one full minute the building forgets how to breathe. The cane makes the first sound, the voice makes the second, and both are unmistakable. Stephanie Forrester returns like a verdict, no press rollout, no whisper campaign, just a statement heavy enough to bend the day. She has been alive, hidden, protected, and she is back to expose the man she says tried to erase her to secure her estate and her power. She names Eric. She calls his devotion a play staged for an audience and backed by documents that look clean only if you don't know where to hold them up to the light. She says he stole not just years, but authorizations, that her death was an orchestration with too many hands on the curtain and too much money greasing the track. No one moves. Eric doesn't blink. The boardroom turns into a courtroom without a bench. Stephanie opens a steel box she kept out of the country and pulls out receipts the town understands better than vows, document trails, notarized amendments, bank wires, hospice logs, medication dispenses. There's a DNR revision with a signature date that collides with an airline manifest placing Eric on a transatlantic flight. There are payments from a Forrester-controlled holding company to a private care facility that doesn't match the hospice on her official paperwork. And there's a nurse's sworn statement describing sedatives delivered in doses that would keep a patient pliant enough to sign what was in front of her. There are emails tender with goodbyes stamped with metadata that says they were typed by someone else. A forensic accountant stands behind her with binders and a voice so flat it reads as truth. An investigator who used to wear a badge says the cremation order that cleared so fast never matched the timeline for body release and was replaced at the last second with a private interment no one witnessed. A doctor whose credentials survive a quick search says the bruises on Stephanie's arms aren't consistent with a single fall. Stephanie doesn't cry. She doesn't need to. She lets the paper stack and the silence do the work. The questions hit like hail. Eric calls it fiction, a manipulation that hurts even as it insults. He says the money moved to protect her privacy, to pay for treatment that can't be coded into municipal forms. He says the nurse is compromised, the investigator bought, the accountant reading shadows. He doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't know how to beg. Stephanie repeats the only line that matters. He tried to end her to secure what the clause made fragile. She points to the Unify the Emblem requirement and says out loud what no one risked saying. This whole circus would be unnecessary if the founder were present to hold the veto herself. She presents one more paper, a sealed letter in her handwriting addressed to the trust officer and opened in the room with a camera rolling. It names a contingency. If she reappears and the clause is active, the founder's seat revives and the veto lives with her until an equivalency instrument is properly installed. That installation, she adds, will require a third keyholder whose claim matches her definition of stewardship. Which is to say, not anyone's spouse, not anyone's convenient proxy. The police arrive because accusations this big don't sit politely while lawyers argue. A warrant drops on Eric's desk like a stone. Financial crimes investigators seize servers on the second floor. Detectives Red writes with the rote calm of a unit that does this every day and still understands what it means to handcuff a name that sits on half the city's walls. Eric doesn't fight. He closes his eyes, kisses Donna's hand, and goes quietly because noise helps no one. The hedge swallows the lights as a car carries him away. The company goes into crisis protocol built for floods and fires, not this. Carter locks bank authorizations, freezes executive travel, secures the covenant filing under litigator privilege, and instructs PR to say the only true sentence left. Forrester will cooperate and continue operations under the governance documents on file. Shareholders stop calling to chew and start calling to ask for the day's closing price. Rivals hold back because you don't step into a family knife fight unless you're sure the knives won't swivel. Brooke can't swallow, Ridge can't blink, Taylor can't forgive the moment for being exactly what it is, a trap that turns their careful solution into a footnote while the founder reclaims a throne someone else is now shackled for allegedly trying to steal. Stephanie doesn't bask. She gets to work the way she always did, brisk, unsentimental, exact. She presents the trust officer with her letter and her living presence and requests immediate recognition of her founder's status pending the court's review of criminal evidence. She argues that the covenant is valid but incomplete, that the third key cannot be awarded while the patriarch who would sway the room sits under arrest. She says the third key belongs temporarily to the founder or to an independent guardian of the emblem designated in the trust for contingency. She has a name ready. A retired judge with no appetite for gossip and a record of treating power like a tool and not a trophy. Taylor bristles, not at the logic, at the speed. Brooke fights to keep the room from spinning and still finds the words to tell Stephanie that weaponizing timing will break people along the way no matter how right she is. Ridge stares into a middle distance that looks like every holiday they survived and every blow they didn't. Carter slices through it with the only instrument he's allowed. Process. He calls an emergency hearing to confirm the founder's status, validate the covenant's registration, and put a temporary guardian in the third chair until a proper selection can be made by the board under the covenant's own rules once the scandal fog thins. The judge who takes the file reads fast and speaks faster. She will not try the criminal case in a civil hearing. She will not unwind corporate control without a bridge. She recognizes Stephanie's founder status pro tem for the sole purpose of not letting the veto fall into the abyss while the house is on fire. She recognizes the covenant as a valid equivalency instrument that satisfies the trust's demand for unification. She appoints the independent examiner named in the covenant as interim guardian of the emblem with limited authority to serve as the third key on veto matters only, not on ordinary operations, pending a full board selection during a properly noticed meeting in 10 days. She sets a hearing date to revisit everything. She glares at the cameras as she leaves. Outside, the town tries to decide what story it wants to tell itself. Is this a resurrection or a coup? Is Eric a villain or a man buried under perfect-looking lies? Is Stephanie a savior or a strategist who waited until the claws made her entrance hurt the most? The only people whose opinions matter are in rooms with no windows. Brooke and Ridge refuse to turn into what the tabloids want. They show up for work. They keep the collection on track. They answer staff questions with facts instead of platitudes. They don't touch the veto because they don't need to use it to prove they have it. Taylor goes home, reads the covenant again, circles the lines that prevent its abuse, and decides to compete for the third key because stewardship is service, and service is not a scandal. Stephanie meets with the examiner and maps a philosophy. The veto is oxygen for fires you hope never ignite. It will not be used to punish, to settle romantic scores, or to turn board votes into duels. It exists to stop damage, not cause it. She asks for a review of any decision that would move data, workforce, or decades-old suppliers into private equity hands under cover of crisis. The examiner, who knows paperwork better than faces, nods. Carter is the man under the mountain, pushing boulders until they move. He negotiates insurance carriers who want to wriggle out of coverage because scandal isn't a defined peril. He writes a memo that saves 3 departments from layoffs by rephrasing a cash crunch into a liquidity event with an end date. He meets Eric in holding, not as a friend, not as a son, as counsel who wants the truth more than he wants the room to like him. Eric insists he didn't try to kill anyone, that every document has a context not captured by a paragraph in a tabloid. He describes a private clinic that specialized in experimental protocols. He describes a fear that privacy would be shredded if he filed through standard channels. He admits he signed papers fast when a doctor said time wasn't a luxury. He admits he paid people who should have documented better and trusted people who made decisions he didn't read closely enough. He denies intent like it's the last vow he'll ever make. Carter says the sentence he has to say, "You need a criminal lawyer. I can't be both shields." The company's special meeting to designate the permanent third key arrives like a storm you can see from every window. The candidates speak in crisp declarations. Steffi promises to guard the veto with data and discipline. Hope promises to bridge without bending. Taylor promises to hold the line and the conscience. Donna bows out gracefully because love and governance don't mix. Ridge tries to step back. The rules say he can't. Brooke doesn't campaign. She doesn't need to. Stephanie surprises no one by saying she would name the judge permanently if the board asks her opinion, then surprises everyone by adding that if Taylor wins the vote. The town can stop pretending that stewardship and romance cannot sit at the same table without breaking the china. The board votes with hands that shake. The envelopes stack. Carter reads them out loud because he is the only person everyone trusts to tell the truth even when it cuts. The count stalls 2 names apart, and the last envelope sits under his palm when a clerk whispers in his ear. The judge moved up the hearing. The independent examiner just filed a report. The police just filed an evidentiary update. The 3 sentences change the air in the room. The report says some of Stephanie's financial exhibits are clean, some are contested, and 1 key affidavit was bolstered by a second witness who showed up unasked. The police update says bail will be argued tomorrow and that they're adding a financial abuse count. The hearing shift means the court could confirm, adjust, or explode the interim governance before the ink on the third key even dries. Carter keeps his voice steady and finishes the count because process doesn't care if you're shaking. The name he reads is the one that promises the most friction and the least theater, Taylor Hayes. Stephanie stands without drama and offers her hand. Brooke exhales like she's been holding her breath for a decade. Ridge looks at the ceiling and thinks whatever is up there that the third key didn't become a magnet for every old fight. The judge gavels the afternoon and stamps the governance as compliant pending the criminal process. The city spins. The show refuses to. It keeps the camera on what matters. A clause that tried to force a wedding and got a company to write a stricter kind of promise instead. A founder who came back with accusations heavy enough to put cuffs on a man the fashion world calls a legend. A council who keeps the roof over their heads by writing rules harder than feelings, and a third key in the hands of a woman who hates spectacle and will use power like a scalpel. The cliffhanger is merciless and earned. If Stephanie's evidence holds, Eric's devotion was a play, the most expensive performance in town. If it cracks, the company will have to find a way to stitch a family back together after it let the whole city believe the unthinkable. The veto lives behind 3 signatures now, and the emblem is unified without rings, but nothing about this house is simple. The next scene is already loading: bail or no bail, confession or counterproof, mercy or war. For now, the lights dim on a brand that refused to let love be a wrench and on a question that will define the next season. Is the founder a savior who anticipated failure and built a narrow bridge back? Or did she come home swinging a story shaped to hurt the one man who loved her loudest? Either way, the pen that signs the next decision will require 3 hands, and in this town, that is the rarest kind of power shared, watched, and very, very real.